Welcome back to This Is Your Mind, Applied Neuroscience for Well-Being. I am your host, Anne-Marie Rossi.
Over the past 2 weeks, we have learned quite a bit about applied neuroscience. First, we learned a simple model of how the brain processes positive and negative stimuli and how these affect your brain and your body, beginning with the activation of the sympathetic nervous system. You spent the first week noticing how this feels to you with the short body scan exercise. Next, we learned about neurons and neural pathways, memory formations, and learning. You spent week 2 practicing formal and informal focused attention exercises.
We are halfway through the course, and by now you have probably noticed just how hard maintaining focused attention really is. This week, we will look at why that is by diving into the 3 main brain networks and how they work to mediate our attention. We will talk about the 5 magnets which pull our attention away from a state of mindfulness, and we will end with an exercise to counter these magnets and expand deeper into our practice.
Within the brain, there are 3 important intertwined networks that help create what we think of as the mind: the default mode network, executive control network, and the salience network. These represent different brain regions and neural pathways that work together. The default mode network includes some of the brain regions we have previously discussed, including the medial prefrontal cortex, which is the innermost area of the prefrontal cortex, and the hippocampus, and is active when we are internally focused. When we are thinking about ourselves or others as they relate to us, our emotions, our memories, it is our default state, as the name implies. So it doesn't really need our focus. This is also the network of imagination, daydreaming, and mind wandering. The executive control network is anchored in the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, which is above the medial prefrontal cortex, and is commonly defined as being externally directed. It is activated when we are aware of and paying attention to the environment around us. It's where cognitive processes such as goal-driven attention, inhibition, and the kind of focused, top-down, voluntary control we need to work through a series of tasks to accomplish something. It takes deliberate effort to be in this network. The default mode network and the executive control network are anti-correlated. If one is on, the other is off. The salience network directs our attention to where it needs to be based on what is going on in our environment. It detects if there is something happening right now that we need to be paying attention to. This can be frightening or surprising stimuli, and stimuli that are pleasurable and rewarding, self-relevant, or emotionally engaging. This network consists in part of the thalamus, amygdala, and hypothalamus. We move between the executive control network and the default mode network by the salience network. However, as the name indicates, the default mode network is our default space. When we are not actively in the executive control network, our mind switches to the default mode network automatically. Like the default setting on your phone, unless you change it, it will stay in the default mode. This is why mindfulness practice can be so hard. We are wired to be pulled to the default mode network. We can tell this has happened when we notice we're thinking about ourselves or that our mind is just wandering, thinking about nothing in particular. In fact, research shows that we spend 60% of our waking hours doing exactly this. The default mode network is where our egos and repetitive negative thoughts arise. In patients suffering from depression, anxiety, or post-traumatic stress disorder, the default mode network is hyperactive. The connection between the salience network and the default mode network is increased in these individuals, creating a powerful feedback loop that amplifies the activity of both networks and decreases the activity of the executive control network. Multiple meta-analysis studies looking at hundreds of functional MRI brain scans show that neurorestorative mindfulness exercises decrease the activity of the default mode network and salience networks, alleviating symptoms of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress disorder. As you have heard us say, these exercises quite literally rewire your brain. Mindfulness practice helps you focus your attention on the present and to stay in the central executive network. But there are some factors that make this work even more challenging. We know through both our own experiences as well as decades of research that there are 5 powerful forces. You can think of them as attention magnets, pulling our attention into the salience and default mode networks and out of our executive control network and our mindfulness practice. These are attachment, avoidance, laziness, anxiety, and doubt. Attachment pulls us into our default mode network when it prevents us from accepting the past or present moment as it was or is. Maybe someone in the past has said or done something that caused you pain. Rather than releasing this past pain, you became attached to it, reliving it over and over and achieving nothing but more suffering in the process. We also do this in relationships to ourselves or others. Have you ever gotten upset with someone because they didn't respond in a way you thought they would? Maybe you were super excited to share some success you've had, but the person you are sharing it with barely reacted or didn't react at all. How did you respond? Did you get angry or disappointed? If so, this is because you attached to an expectation, and when that was not met, you suffered. The attachment magnet gets stronger each time we engage with it, pulling us back over and over again, like a tractor beam. Avoidance is another magnet powered by an aversion to stressful thoughts, feelings, memories, or sensations in the body. We naturally avoid these things we don't like. I can't stand bananas. I recoil when I smell or taste them, and if I accidentally put one in my mouth, yuck, I immediately spit it out and into the trash can. Often, we do the same thing with thoughts, feelings, sensations, and memories. We spit them out, throw them in the trash, and pretend as though they did not happen. But here's the thing. There's no garbage service in your brain. You know what happens when garbage gets left out? It rots and stinks. Every thought, word, and action can be tinged with the putridness of avoidance. The only way to rid ourselves of this is to acknowledge the challenging stimulus present, investigate it, and accept it. This is how we remove the magnet's power to influence our conscious and unconscious behaviors. We learn to sit with all of our experiences, feeling them in their entirety in order to learn and grow from them and ultimately accept them as what is. Avoidance is an incredibly powerful magnet, as it seems an easy solution to complex problems. One of my favorite songs, Ball and Chain by Social Distortion, perfectly summarizes this. But wherever I have gone, I was sure to find myself there. You can run all your life and not go anywhere. The laziness magnet can, for many, be the main detractor for mindfulness practice. It can look like feeling sleepy and heavy in the body or mind, or both. Being constantly busy and distracted, often with meaningless things, or just copping out with the idea that you just can't do it, or that mindfulness doesn't work for you. These are all laziness that powers this magnet. I can't count how many times I've heard people tell me they just don't have the time. They'll start tomorrow. They're too tired now. They need to wash the lint out of their belly button immediately. It takes energy to build new neural pathways and to pull yourself away from the powerful magnet of the path of least resistance, also known as laziness. Everything in your life worth something to you requires your effort. Mindfulness and the health of your nervous system is no different. Anxiety, or as I call it, fear of the future, is a feeling of worry, nervousness, or unease, typically about an imminent event or something with an uncertain outcome. Anxiety tricks you into believing that by being hypervigilant, which is just another way of saying in a state of constant worry, you'll somehow avoid a negative future outcome. This becomes self-fulfilling, wherein each time something bad happens, your mind clings to the negative experience like Velcro and uses it as a reinforcement for continued negative rumination. But our memories of the times that our worst nightmares didn't come true slip away like sand through your fingers. As I previously mentioned, people with anxiety have hyperfunctioning salience and default mode networks, and thusly hyperfunctioning amygdala hypothalamus activations. The magnet for someone with anxiety into this space is like the sun, becoming the center of their universe, and like a massive gravitational field pulling them constantly into these networks. The last magnet of distraction is doubt, a feeling of uncertainty or lack of conviction. Often, this is what shows up when we're afraid we'll fail. Our mind processes change the same way it does an imminent death. Our salience network becomes hyperactive when presented with change, particularly unplanned change. We are pulled into the default mode network to process this change, and our instinctual response is to doubt the safety of what is happening, of the change in behavior, thoughts, stimuli, and so on. The doubt we experience is hardwired as an instinctual protective response. The I can'ts turn into the I don'ts very easily because of the strength of this magnet. As you may have noticed, all of the magnets are powered by your thoughts. And so, the only way to weaken their pull is to become aware of the inner dialogue, which, like a puppeteer, is directing your entire experience of the world. The body scans, our first practice, brought awareness of the physical sensations of the activation of our sympathetic nervous system. We begin here because we do not ever fix problems we don't think we have, and our body tells us first that we have been triggered. Next, we practiced neurorestorative exercises to override this instinctual activation, bringing us some conscious control over our nervous system. Now we have introduced the main brain networks and the role they play in moving us from one state to the other. By bringing awareness to our thoughts, we can discover what our strongest magnets are. How and when do they pull our attention into their field? We can discern which network we are in and choose if that space is serving us, allowing us to switch networks if we desire, using our neurorestorative mindfulness practices to initiate a switch to the executive control network, if we choose. By being aware of this inner dialogue, we can cut the strings and no longer be puppeted around by our salience and default mode networks. we can be truly free to choose how we experience our life. Our minds are thought-making machines. We are constantly narrating our experiences, current, past, and future. A never-ending train of dialogue running through our minds at all times. This dialogue tells us which of the brain networks we are in. If we are mind-wandering, ruminating, having anxious thoughts or worrying or daydreaming, we know we are in the default mode network or the salience network. If our thoughts are about our current experience, accessing memories of stored knowledge, not personal or emotional, reasoning, learning, problem solving, and comprehension, then we know that we are in the executive control network. Use this exercise to begin to hear these thoughts as an objective observer, simply with the goal of listening without attachment or engagement, to watch these thoughts move like train cars without getting on, bringing awareness to what brain networks we are in, how these thoughts influence our experiences, and ultimately giving us power to choose which train car we get on and which we allow to pass us by. Let's begin. Find a comfortable position laying down, or if you are sitting, make sure your spine is erect. Roll your shoulders back and down. Relax your neck so that you are not straining. Close your eyes. Take a deep breath. I will walk through the instructions and then allow you time to engage. I want you to watch with curiosity and openness as your mind does the work of a mind, constantly creating something to be talking about. Imagine these thoughts as though they are train cars and you are watching them move along the track. If you have found that you are engaging with this thought, either by agreeing or by fighting and disagreeing with it, you know that you are now on the train car. Simply notice this, take a mental step back, and return to the observer position, off of the train, and watch as the thoughts pass. They will come and go, and you have the power to choose to step off at any time. Open your eyes and return to the present moment. This week, we learned about the 3 main brain networks and how they work to mediate our attention. We discussed the 5 magnets which pull our attention away from a state of mindfulness. And we introduced the practice of awareness of thoughts as a measure to deepen our awareness of our mental state and ultimately, therefore, enable consciously controlled switching if we choose. This week, focus on your awareness of thoughts practices, both formally and informally. Engage in the audio-guided practice at least 4 times this week, as well as bringing your attention to your thoughts periodically throughout the day. If this becomes overwhelming, remember at any time you can switch networks and engage in your mindfulness practices to allow yourself the ability to rest and recover.